Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Big Tent in Denver at the Democratic National Convention. My name is Duke Cox. I'm going to be the Master of Ceremonies today. Before I announce the first panel, I would like to make a thank you to the Alliance for Sustainable Colorado that is responsible for this event. I would also like to thank Progress Now and the Daily Coast for their involvement in this effort, and also DIG for providing the stage for us here today. The first panel is called LGBT Issues in 2006, What a Difference 4 Years Makes. This panel is being sponsored by the Human Rights Campaign, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Human Rights Campaign. They are America's largest civil rights organization working to achieve gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender equality. They were founded in 1980 and have developed a grassroots force of over 725,000 members and supporters. The purpose of the Human Rights Campaign is to strive to end discrimination against LGBT citizens and advocates for equal rights and benefits in the workplace. I'd like to introduce you today the moderator of today's panel, who is associated with the Human Rights Campaign, and his name is Christopher Johnson. Mr. Johnson?
Sit for free, and then I gotta go sit.
Welcome.
First, I'd like to welcome Celinda Lake, Democratic pollster. And after Celinda, we have Jonathan Capehart, member of the Washington Post editorial board. And Arizona State Representative Kyrsten. So thanks for being here this morning. Well, good morning. My name is Chris Johnson. I am the Director of Interactive Communications for the Human Rights Campaign in Washington, D.C. It's a privilege to welcome our panelists here to Denver. Our panel is called LGBT Issues in 2008, What Difference 4 Years Makes, because we've definitely seen a progression in how LGBT issues are affecting politics versus 2004, where we saw Karl Rove and the Republicans really use Massachusetts' decision to offer marriage equality to gay and lesbian couples. We saw the Republicans really use that as a wedge issue to really promote lots of anti-LGBT amendments and constitutional amendments to across the states. And so what we want to do today is kind of discuss how LGBT issues are actually having an impact in this year's election in 2008. Definitely seen a change in polling regarding the support for LGBT issues. And we just want to kind of figure out where we are today and what we can expect in the 2008 election. So I'm just going to introduce our panelists a little more fully. And so sitting next to me, we have Celinda Lake. Celinda Lake is a veteran Democratic pollster, or she was for progressive candidates as well. And she has a unique perspective on the change that's been happening over a variety of years in terms of public perspectives on LGBT issues. And so we're really, really thrilled to have her here today. Next to Celinda, we have Jonathan Capehart. Jonathan is a Washington Post editorial board member, and he was also one of our panelists for the very first Logo HRC Foundation Presidential Forum that we sponsored last August. So here we are a year later, and Jonathan really got a lot of great media attention, both in the LGBT press and in the mainstream press, for his great job on that forum, so we're especially happy to have him here today. And Jonathan was also in MSNBC morning show this morning, so he's already having an early morning, so we're really happy that he was able to make it with us today. And there's his coffee.
Still drinking coffee.
So he's still thawing out a bit. And then at the end we have Arizona State Representative Kyrsten. Kyrsten is definitely a rising leader in the Democratic circles, and definitely she has a very great perspective on marriage ballot amendments, because there's one she helped defeat the last one in Arizona, and she's working to defeat the one that's on the ballot in November. And also because she's from Arizona, she has a unique perspective on the record of Senator John McCain. She's actually been a key instrumental voice in helping HRC produce a report on John McCain's LGBT record. So we're especially thrilled to have her here today as well. So I just want to welcome our panelists again. So what I'd like to do is just give the panelists a few seconds or a few minutes just to kind of give an opening statement, to kind of talk about their own particular areas of expertise. I'm going to start off with Celinda, who's going to kind of give us an overview of where her perspectives are on LGBT issues today and kind of how they've kind of moved over the last 4 years or so.
Thank you very much. And I also have a PowerPoint that we already have here. Let me not stand in front of it. First of all, I want to thank the panel so much, and HRC and their leadership and all the other folks that we've worked with so much on these issues. Let me say also that I really want to acknowledge Kyrsten because she's made in so many ways this data actually come true. And isn't a rising leader? I think you already are a leader. At least I follow you.
I'll be rising.
There you go. There you go. So here we have the presentation. I'm going to just do a quick lay of the land and a quick kind of summary of where we are and also some of the language as well as the data. So the first thing I think that's going on is that we in support of rights for gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual people have really understood how to set the frame. For a long time we were on defense, and now I think at a minimum we're on status quo, and really I think more on offense. And part of that is because we've understood early on that whoever sets the frame wins the debate, and that repetition matters. I think as a movement, and HRC's been a real leader in this, we have become much more disciplined and understood the difference between messages to our base and messages to swing voters. There are a number of examples of, and I'll just use some examples from campaigns about how to work with frames, and I want to acknowledge both George Lakoff and Drew Weston for having, I think, all of us on the progressive side understood more about this issue of emotionally setting an issue and how much that affects what happens afterwards. So one of the things you can do with a frame is you can flip their frame, and obviously that's the nicest kind of activity to be engaged in. And so we did, for example, working with many people in the progressive community, Debbie Stabenow's race for U.S. Senate. Debbie Stabenow, 19 points down in early October, being outspent 2.5 to 1. Her opponent, Senator Spence Abraham, had established the theme, I'm a workhorse for Michigan. Well, after months and months of media, there's not a lot you could do about changing that. I mean, it was set as a frame. And so we abandoned completely our initial messaging and went to, oh, he's a workhorse, all right, but who's he working for? And that gained 19 points in 2.5 weeks. The second idea, and one where we didn't actually, it should have been done, you probably all remember Newt Gingrich, and oh my goodness, here he is back again. But Newt Gingrich establishing the contract with America, and our side thinking that they were completely on the run with the contract with America. Well, sometimes the best way to beat a frame is to actually go through that frame. And so it isn't like the average American says, oh, goody, goody, I get another contract today. Or, boy, a day without a contract is a day without sunshine. People do not like contracts. They think they're always screwed in the fine print. They think contracts don't mean they're never kept up. So what if we had taken on the contract with America and said, did you look at the fine print lately? Look at what's in that contract. So you go through a frame to actually turn that frame against someone. And then finally, there are times when you want to change the frame. And I think the LGBT community has been very, very aggressive, for example, about understanding, thanks to the insights that we all have, about the rights frame not being a very good frame for us. Many of us are in this movement because we believe sincerely it is the civil rights movement of our time. It is an issue of basic human rights. But that language does not test very well with swing voters. First of all, swing voters don't like rights to begin with. They don't respond very well to that language, period, even before they get to our issues. And so we found it's much, much better, particularly with women voters, to change that frame from rights to protections. Protections are something that everyone should be guaranteed. Protections are something, you don't want to harm people. And so, boy, if you take away protections, if you don't grant protections, that can be harmful to people. It's a softer language, but a much more powerful emotional language to people in most circumstances. Well, though we have improved in our situation, I did have to include this one slide of John McCain's quote let us not misunderstand that our task is to be as aggressive as we can be about winning this election, because while the voters have receded and while the initiatives have been less successful, the presidential candidates have a very, very strong distinction on this issue. And I think anyone who heard Michelle Obama yesterday cannot speak to what a greater difference there would be. Can you imagine what Cindy McCain's speech would have been like? There is, if they would have let her speak. So couldn't be a starker distinction here in terms of what's at stake in this election. So first of all, what we find here, this is agree-disagree statements. And one of the things we found is that very, very important, one of the stronger frames that we have is staying out of other people's personal lives and keeping the government out of other people's personal lives. Also, gay couples deserve the same legal protections as other people. Now notice, marriage is down at 39%. Same legal protections up at 78%. That is the difference that framing and language can make here. People much more divided about language about discrimination and rights, particularly when it comes to marriage. And people do not, there are cases where discrimination works quite well for us. When it's legal discrimination in employment or housing or areas like that, marriage is not one of the areas. Marriage is an attitude that has really lagged behind. Although it's interesting, states are changing. Massachusetts now, totally in favor of marriage. Connecticut, right next door, totally in favor of marriage. They were really glad to be able to observe rather than participate, but now 55% of Connecticut voters in favor of marriage between gay and lesbian couples. One of the reasons that we are benefiting here in terms of our data, and one of the reasons for change is that moral issues in general are having less sway than they used to have. And people also believe that moral issues are, while morality is in decline, they believe that there are things like television and what parents are teaching their kids that are much more contributory to moral decline in our society than anything that gay and lesbian couples are doing, or gay and lesbian people are doing. And the whole moral thing is having much less power. One of my favorite, we're working very hard, many of the people up on this stage, to defeat the ban on gay marriage in California. And there is the religious community, the conservative religious community is planning vigils in stadiums where they sing in San Diego. They're going to get thousands of ministers to have a prayer vigil in the Qualcomm Stadium in San Diego. And we tested it, and God bless the American voters. The voters in California said, why do they have to have a prayer vigil on this? Why couldn't they have a prayer vigil on gas prices? So God bless the economy. It has set America's priorities right. Strong frames that exist for us, I think there are three different situations. There are long-term frames where we want to establish a long-term strength of our position. There are short-term frames that we want to talk about in a legislative context, and then short-term frames in an actual ballot initiative context. And those can be quite different. First of all, some of the language about love, commitment, in God's eyes we're all equal, very important language for a long-term setting of our context. Not very good for immediate context of beating something in the legislature or passing something in the legislature or beating an initiative. But we shouldn't forget the long-term change that we're trying to create in our society. And in fact, one of the strongest contributors to long-term change has been the increase in the number of people who realize that they know someone gay and lesbian. I always love that data because married men think they know 20% fewer gay and lesbian people than married women do. Now, presumably married men and married women know the same people, so I always find that a fascinating statistic. But people who recognize that they know gay and lesbian people, and the more gay and lesbian people that people recognize that they know, the more progressive their attitudes are. In a short-term fight, the legal structure often works very well for us, and you can see the top and the bottom numbers. People, for example, do not like workplace discrimination. They're horrified that you can be fired or hired for your job solely because you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. And real common sense here is way ahead of the elites. So, you know, Congress tied itself up in knots over transgender. Real people think if you're a transgender, if you are contemplating that, then you have to be really serious. That is a very, very tough choice in our society, or a tough thing to go through. So you have to really strongly feel that you are transgender, or you would never, you don't adopt transgender for a weekend to have fun. That's not something that people would go through. We tested the case actually in Utah of the train conductor who was fired from their job because they thought it would be bad for the trains, which bathroom would the person choose to use. First of all, women could care less what bathroom. It's just like, shut the door, who cares? And just, could we have more women's bathrooms? That's the real issue. Could we be in line less? That's the only issue. The other issue was, God bless the American voters, they said, ever seen a train conductor in the bathroom? I mean, I could give a damn less. Who knows where the train conductors go to the bathroom? I care how fast they get the tickets. So there's a certain common sense here. You'll notice here, in terms of one of the long-term changes, is acceptability. And you'll see here that the numbers crossed, maybe not as early as we would have liked, but in the late 90s. And now a solid majority of Americans say that gay and lesbian people are acceptable. They don't say that gay and lesbian marriage is acceptable, however. But even on marriage equality, you can see that the numbers are getting much, much closer. There really, really are long-term changes here that are happening. I'm going a little over my time, so I'm going to shift ahead here to vocabulary to use and vocabulary not to use. Marriage. Marriage is still our toughest fight in many ways. And people think of themselves as expert on marriage, and they would love a civil union on steroids. They would love a souped-up civil union, but there's still a lot of women voters in particular who say, why do we have to call it marriage? Civil rights of our generation, not good testing language. First of all, whites don't like the civil rights movement particularly to begin with, and African Americans don't like it co-opted for this struggle. That consenting adults in love should be able to do whatever they want. People don't believe that. People don't believe that consenting adults in love, sadly, should be able to do whatever they want, even in heterosexual relationships or period. So we need to understand the culture in which we're in. The Bible is just a guide for current living. We cannot take it literally. 89% of voters think that the Bible is literal, even though they will then go and acknowledge, well, we don't usually stone people anymore, at least in the United States we don't. Legally binding relationships. Interestingly, we thought this was a way around the gay marriage issue, but it's not. People think that marriage is more than just the law. They'd be fine with creating a law, but marriage in their minds is different than law. Gay and lesbian unmarried couples need these rights. Now, interestingly, there are two places where rights work better, and that is California right now, because people acknowledge that we would be eliminating something, we would be taking something away. People are hesitant to do that. And of course, we got the insight about that in the Arizona fight that Kyrsten will talk about taking away things from people. And finally, discrimination, although it does work in the context of ENDA. What is language that does work? Gay and lesbian couples deserve the same legal protections as other people. The children of unmarried couples deserve the same legal protections as the children of married couples. Now, interestingly, normally in this movement, we consider a day without children to be a good day. And the children issue has been very difficult to raise. But we're starting to find in the research that there are some openings around children that are good openings for us. Regardless of how you feel about this issue, very important language to give people permission to have ambivalence. And that's been important in the abortion movement as well. We should not treat people differently under the law. People should be able to decide on their own without government interference. And remember, gay and lesbians are our families, our friends, our neighbors, our co-workers. Very, very important in terms of framing this issue. So lots of long-term trends moving in our direction and some short-term ones as well. And it's put the right in a much less strong position on these issues. Thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan now to give a statement.
And thanks very much, Celinda, for that great presentation, because that's a lot of information for someone like me to have. And if it's possible, I'd love to get a copy of that. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I don't have a long presentation, but there are a few things that I do want to say. As Chris mentioned, I was one of the panelists for the HRC logo forum last year, and it's hard to believe that it's already been a year. And so I guess the question is, where are we a year from that moment? And I think, you know, we're sort of still in that slow roll towards equality, but it's a roll that's continuing forward. In 2004, as Celinda just talked about, there are all these ballot initiatives all around the country. And I think the primary purpose of those initiatives was to drive up turnout among the conservative base. They knew it was going to be a close election against John Kerry. So what's the one thing you could talk about that would drive the right absolutely crazy? You talk about homosexuality, you talk about gay marriage, you talk about the gays to drive out the vote. And the interesting thing is, while it did drive up the conservative base, it picked off quite a few African Americans who would have gone to John Kerry, because African Americans, if I could be the ambassador to the race for 1 minute, and speaking from my own personal observations, if African Americans are conservative on a particular issue, it will be gay and lesbian issues. And it's a testament to African American leaders like Congressman John Lewis and others who take a bold, principled stand on gay rights and gay marriage, that it's pretty incredible. So the fact that we're now 4 years later, and where are gay and lesbian issues at the presidential level? They're nowhere. We're not on the radar screen. And that's a good thing. That's a fantastic thing, because I think for what Celinda just said, moral issues just don't play with the American people anymore. And I would add that they don't play because look at the issues that the country is facing right now. We've got an economy that's in the toilet. We are mired in one war, understaffed and underperforming in another war, foreclosures, all sorts of things that people are much more worried about their own livelihoods, whether they're going to have a job, or their homes, or whether their family is safe, and whether their son or daughter is going to come back from the front, than they are, worried about whether the gay couple next door wants to get married or wants to have protections. I just think the American people have many more things to worry about, and so the ballot initiatives that are out there now, I don't think will have. I bet it's been a long day already. I can barely speak. But I just don't think that those initiatives will have the same punch this time around. And also, in the 4 years since the 2004 election, and even since the logo forum, we've seen some pretty incredible things happen politically. San Francisco, California, what's happening there? Mayor Bloomberg in New York, who, as a matter of full disclosure, I worked for on the first campaign, he's not only come out for gay marriage, but the city of New York now recognizes marriages from other jurisdictions, even though the state of New York does not recognize same-sex unions, same-sex marriages just yet. And Governor Spitzer, when he came into office early on, said that he was in favor of gay marriage. As we all know, his governorship imploded. But the lieutenant governor, Governor David Patterson, African-American governor, the first black governor of New York, from a dynastic family politically in New York State, particularly New York City, and in Harlem, came out and said within days of becoming governor that he was in favor of gay marriage and was going to push for legislation to do that. So I think we as a community, the gay community, is in a much stronger position than it was last year, infinitely stronger position than it was 4 years ago. But I think, as Celinda alluded to in her presentation, in her remarks, this is a long-term, I don't want to use the word battle, but this is a long-term project, for lack of a better word and lack of sleep, that the gay community has to keep its eyes on the ultimate goal. And I'm so glad to see in your presentation that marriage is not the end result, that there are a whole lot more things that the community needs to fight for beyond marriage. So with that, I will end.
Great.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Kyrsten.
Well, it's great to be here with all of you this morning, and I'm also functioning on a incredibly small amount of sleep, so I'll try and. Yeah, I haven't slept in days. But I'm having such a great time. It's my first convention, so you know I've got the whole convention virgin thing going on. I'm going to every party there is. So. First, it's a great honor to be here, and I'm just especially excited to be here with my good friend Celinda, who has been part of the mastermind team in Arizona to help us win the historic defeat in 2006 of the first and so far the only state to defeat a gay marriage ban. Interestingly enough, I don't think it'll be the last. I think we're going to see 3 states this year that defeat the marriage ban, and I actually predict that trifecta of defeat will end this issue as a wedge issue for the right, and they'll have to move on to hating other people, which I'm sure they'll do just fine. What I want to talk about a little bit is just kind of how we did what we did in Arizona, and then also offer some insight into the role that John McCain played in that election in 2006. And let me first start, if I start with McCain, I'll never go back. So let me start with what we did in Arizona, and then I'll move to McCain. In 2005, January 2005, I, like many people across the country, was reeling from the 17 ballot initiatives that occurred in 2004 and just suffering from the horrible losses of each of those campaigns. And so in Arizona, we knew that a similar fight would be coming to our state in 2006 because our great governor, Jen Napolitano, who some of you might have seen last night on the stage, she was up for re-election in 2006, and she's a very popular, very pragmatic governor, and there was an effort to put this on the ballot against her as a way to drive out the conservative base and defeat her in her re-election bid. Interestingly enough, her opponent in the 2006 election was the president of our state's version of Focus on the Family, and he was actually the one who physically crafted the marriage ban in 2006. So this was a real central part of the 2006 election cycle. And what we did in Arizona was really seek to learn from the activities that other folks had done around the country and to find ways to talk about this differently. And we were smart enough to hire Celinda, who has a lot of experience in Arizona and has been working with our governor for a number of years, and really to start to learn about what voters want and what voters care about. And what we really found was that, number one, voters don't really want to talk about this issue. They just would rather talk about something else, particularly how much milk costs or the rising price of gas. And they just were not interested, even in 2006, on this issue. And if it had just gone away, they would have been much happier to have nothing to do with it. And I think that really reflects where a large part of America is, that they're not necessarily anti or pro on any of our issues. They just kind of are like, leave me alone about this, and are just not really driven one way or the other. But what we see is that the right is using it definitely as a wedge to try and force people to take a stand. So what we ultimately did in Arizona was we provided opportunities for people to vote without having to take a stand on the issue of same-sex marriage. And for a very simple reason. They didn't need to. There was no need for voters to say, I support or I oppose same-sex marriage. And that was really important for us not to ask them that question, because many voters didn't know. They were confused. They had conflicted feelings. And frankly, I didn't care what their feelings were, because our goal in Arizona was to stop the ban. And you can vote against a ban without supporting the opposite of a ban, right? So you can say, I don't want a ban on same-sex marriage, without being comfortable with same-sex marriage. And what we looked for in Arizona were opportunities for voters to make that distinction and find a place for themselves that they felt comfortable. And the point that we found that voters really attached to was the concept of taking away. And Celinda briefly mentioned this in her presentation, but what we found in Arizona was that voters really resented the idea that the government would take away existing benefits and protections that Arizona citizens enjoyed. So the idea of taking away health care benefits, domestic partner protections, hospital visitation rights was really just kind of offensive to most people in Arizona. And so our campaign really focused on the issue of why. We just wanted to know why would these folks pushing this initiative want to take healthcare benefits away from kids? I don't know the answer. And we asked John McCain that very question throughout the course of the campaign. Because John McCain came on board as the spokesperson for the Yes campaign. He posed for their mailers, he advertised in their television commercials, and he was their bully pulpit for this campaign. And I believe that he saw this as a way to kind of burnish or kind of grow his right-wing credentials. But what happened was that the voters really saw that as being outside of the mainstream. And so while voters have conflicting views on the issues facing gay and lesbian people in Arizona, they're pretty unified on the idea of healthcare, and that is, we need more of it. Arizona has the highest percentage of uninsured children in the country. And so any idea that you're going to take healthcare away from children is pretty offensive to voters. And so we were able to really position this concept of taking away in a way that really neutralized the intent of the right, which is to create this moral wedge, and instead focused on a different moral issue. And I want to just take a little quick caveat and say that I actually think that voters do care about moral issues. I just think that voters are redefining what are the moral issues of today. I was talking with some young evangelicals a couple days ago, and they said that their top 3 moral issues in this country are poverty, global warming, and Darfur. And those are moral issues, and I share those same views with them. And so I think that we do have voters who vote on issues of morality, but we're redefining what our moral values are. And I would say that we're actually looking at a higher level of morality by focusing on things like who has health care and who doesn't in our country, and who has the right to be safe in their homeland, and who is facing a genocide. So those are the kinds of moral issues that are really higher up on the agenda for voters. And a very moral issue, which is, do I have the resources and the security to take care of my family? Which is absolutely at the very top of voters' minds this year. So I think we're lucky because the new moral issues for voters are the issues that we as Democrats and we as progressives have been fighting for years. So when we saw that in 2006, it really separated John McCain from the mainstream Arizona community, who was very concerned about the concept of taking real life benefits away from people. We were able to defeat the initiative in Arizona, and since that time have been lucky enough to work with other states to kind of focus on this idea of communicating these issues to voters in a way that really pushes aside identity politics and focuses more on a unified message of how our entire community will be impacted with the passage of these kinds of initiatives. Now, in Arizona in 2008, we're facing another initiative. And this year, the initiative will not affect domestic partnerships or straight couples. It's simply a ban on same-sex marriage. But we've been lucky to find some really resonant messages with voters again this year, because what we found in 2008 is that voters in Arizona, and I think this is true for much of the country, are just really sick and tired of these games. They want to know how they're going to feed their family, how they're going to get gas in their car to get to work every day, who's going to pay for health care for their kids. And they're just not concerned about these kinds of, quote, wedge issues. And so what we found in Arizona is that voters are really upset at politicians for trying to push these divisive issues back on the ballot. They're sick and tired in Arizona of being treated like they're dumb, because really they're saying, wait, I already did this in 2006. Why am I doing it again? And so there's really some resentment, some deep resentment at politicians for really ignoring their voice from 2006 and forcing them to vote on an issue again. And what they're looking for is some trust. They want to feel like public officials trust their voice and their vote, and that they're going to be respected. And what we're seeing in Arizona, and I think this will also be important in states around the country, is that they're really looking to have their own views and their previous actions respected and left alone. And so when we talk about what's happening in 2008, in California we see that this initiative is trying to take away an existing protection and existing benefits that families currently enjoy. And in Arizona, what we're seeing is an attempt by politicians to take away the vote of the people in 2006. And that really rankles voters. And I think that's one of the key differences with the candidacy of John McCain and his history and those of Barack Obama and the Democratic Party. So, you know, a little bit more on John McCain. Many people have said, well, he was a great maverick, and John McCain really used to be an independent voice. And there were some issues in which John McCain had a more independent voice in the past. Campaign finance reform, drilling at Anwar. But all of that, as we have seen every day on CNN, has gone out the window. Even his views on war and his views on immigration have changed. But one thing that has never changed for John McCain are his views on equality and providing protections and benefits for people. John McCain, from the very beginning, has been a hostile and antagonistic voice against individuals who seek to enjoy the same protections as other people in this country. He has never once in his entire history in the United States Senate cast a single vote to extend or protect existing protections for lesbian and gay people. Not one vote. So I've been talking with individuals around the country who say, well, he's just pandering to the religious right for this election. And while that is very certainly true, he has not pandered on this issue because he has always been bad on issues not just for the gay and lesbian community, but for any community that seeks to have either a protection of existing benefits or an extension of benefits to keep those families safe and healthy. And I think that's an important part of this presidential campaign. We see the stark differences between John McCain and Barack Obama. John McCain wants to deny children the right to health care if they have two parents of the same gender. He wants to deny those children the right to have legal protections in case one parent is in an emergency or passes away. And these are not unique, these are not new. These are John McCain's true beliefs, and they have been for many years. And I think he really highlighted that in 2006 when he took such a public stand in support of the marriage amendment in Arizona. He himself admitted that that amendment's #1 impact would be to deny health benefits to children of unmarried couples, both straight and gay. And yet he continued to film TV commercials for them and to mail out literature supporting that view. And really that's very much in line with his view about health care across the board. So those are kind of my comments, and I'm happy to answer questions when we get there.
Thanks to our panelists for those opening remarks. Can you all hear me okay? Yes? Okay. So I have a few questions I'd like to ask our panelists, and then I'll open it up for any audience questions. The first question I'd like to ask Celinda is, most Americans seem to have developed, at the very least, a basic comfort level with LGBT issues. And you've been polling for several years and have witnessed this transformation up close. Are there LGBT issues that are now so broadly supported by the American people that they've just become mainstream? And looking back, when do you think the public opinion really started to shift on this?
Well, it's a really good question. I would say one of the issues that certainly mainstream is, and some of the mainstream issues, our biggest problem is actually not that the voters oppose us, but that the voters aren't clear that this could happen. And people think it is illegal, and they're totally supportive of that, to fire someone solely because they're gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. So that is a total support. Hate crimes. Hate crimes even stronger than ENDA, and hate crimes having a very strong support among evangelicals, actually, which is interesting. And one of the things, and I believe this data is publicly available, if you look at the Gill website, they did a study, we did a study with them with a Republican pollster, and found contrary to popular belief in conventional wisdom, there are some issues like that that are supported by evangelicals as well. Any kind of commercial transaction, housing, credit, anything like that. There has been really dramatic movement on domestic partnership and also civil unions. And it depends on the state, but it's quite common now to have a majority of voters in favor of both of those things. So those are some things, and Kyrsten may have some others that come to mind. I think the transition really began in the 80s. And actually, so it's been going on for a lot longer than we think.
but it really took off in the mid-90s. And one of the things that happened in the mid-90s is just this dramatic increase in terms of people who thought they knew gay and lesbian people, and also thought, I mean, lots of people for a while thought they knew the one coworker, or, you know, Uncle Joe who'd never brought his partner to the family reunions. Well, now Uncle Joe's brought his partner to the family reunions. And it's really, and people are increasingly aware of it. You're also starting to see in the data the first cohort that really has a number of their children coming out to them. And that has had a very profound impact on people. And we're finding that in terms of some of the strongest spokespeople in the gay marriage fight in California right now are parents in their 60s, 65-ish, who talk about one of their children coming out, and they want that child to have the same rights as their straight children have. So that's a big difference as well. And then the number of people that you know who are gay and lesbian. The last thing I would say is that there's a real difference between the youngest cohort. Voters 18 to 35 really do have dramatically different attitudes. And they're the first cohort that really is pro-gay rights, pro-marriage, also have adopted tolerance as a core norm, and that's a real difference. And so I think you're going to see two changes occurring. You're going to see a generational change as we see that difference, and we're also going to see an attitudinal change even among the people who are staying with us.
Okay. Have got the 2-minute warning. So I do want to ask Jonathan Capehart one question that we've been kind of talking about in the communications department at HRC, and that would be after the 2004 elections, the quote-unquote conventional wisdom among the political pundits seemed to be that gay marriage was a decisive issue in the elections. Since then, we've heard from Matthew Dowd, who worked for Bush, we've heard from Mark Melvin, who worked for Kerry, that this was not true. As far as you can tell, what's the current conventional wisdom among the pundits, and how do you think that's changed since '04?
Well, now that I guess I'm part of that conventional wisdom punditocracy, I think that, as I said before, in 2004, and you know, Matthew Dowd and Ken Melman and those guys, you know, 4 years later, everyone recognizes what they were trying to do. So I think they're trying to get themselves on the right side of history here. I think that now, if there is a conventional wisdom, it's that the RNC tried something. It worked in the short term, but the country is moving, even though I call it the slow roll to equality, the country is moving rather quickly on these issues. And I think now, because gay issues are, I've got 30 seconds. I think because, as I said before, gay and lesbian issues at the presidential level are not on the radar screen. And if there's a conventional wisdom, and I'll just create it right now since I'm a member, since I'm now a pundit, conventional wisdom is that they will not have an effect on this election. And I'm so glad to see Celinda nodding, because she's the one who's mining the data. She knows this stuff inside and out. So it'll be great to have this conversation 4 years from now to see just where things are.
I think we're basically out of time at this point.
I'm so sorry.
So I do want to thank our panelists for coming this early morning after a late night and being with us today. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes to talk with some of the other people who are here and maybe downstairs to answer a couple of questions. So thank you all very much. Thank you, panelists.
get that